to the people that are being affected than at a state or at a federal level where it can become abstract and it's the people on television. When it's in your city or in your neighborhood, it's a completely different conversation. So as we talk about these topics today, retribution and rehabilitation, I want you to think in terms of how it would matter to you and how it would matter to people that live around you as we go through our questions. Now, I would like to spend some time, and I should give you additional information about myself. One of the things that makes not only my work unique, but also the work of many of my colleagues at Prison Fellowship is that we have criminal records. We've actually been through the criminal justice system ourselves. So for me, you'll hear me give examples very close to what I actually did. I was arrested for a drunk driving violation. That's a criminal offense in every state in America. And I had another arrest because I had an addiction that I needed to overcome. So at Prison Fellowship, as well as what we're finding when we're doing research, when we're trying to find a way to actually find an effective solution to crime and have a person repay the damage they've done, it helps to learn from people that have actually lived through that. And in America today, I'll give you some statistics. There are 65 million American adults that have a criminal record. That's a little bit more than 1 in 4 adults have some form of criminal record, as I do. If you look at the incarceration in America, we incarcerate more than any industrialized country in human history at the size that America is today. So how we use retribution and how we use rehabilitation is very important because it's become such a big part of our life. In the K-12 system, where all of you are currently members of, on average in America today, 1 in 28 students in the K-12 system has a parent who is incarcerated today. Not a parent who has been incarcerated ever in their life, but that's incarcerated this evening while we're talking on this call. And so it has become a part of our life, and it not only affects the life of the person that is in the system. When we choose something like retribution or rehabilitation, the outcome of whether or not it's going to be successful when 95% of the people or more will leave prison, will leave jail, and come back into the community. The question of rehabilitation or retribution is, did we do everything we could do to make sure that the person never does that crime again? Because that's what we're investing in with the justice system. Now, I do want to make some points here and back up and talk about the 3 traditional goals of the justice system. When somebody commits a crime or harms someone else, something in us cries out for justice. But I'd ask you, what is justice? That's what we're here to talk about today. To help you with the starting point, think of it as the righting of wrongs. Something wrong has occurred, and how do we make it right? It's complicated. Justice is something we all say we believe in, but defining what that actually means and how to achieve it can actually get pretty complex. Despite the difficulty, this is something we should wrestle with, and that's why I think you're on the call today. One way to begin thinking about justice is to consider the purposes of the punishment. Why do we punish people? What is the aim? When we discuss justice, especially as it is to do with crime and punishment, we need to understand the actions of the judges, juries, and policymakers as having really one of 3 purposes, not the 2 we're primarily talking about today. It's retribution, rehabilitation, which we're going to talk about, but also deterrence. Deterrence. I believe, Prison Fellowship believes where I work, for justice that restores. And I'm going to get to that and explain what that is. But first, I want you to understand the traditional goals of the justice system and their limitations, because I think that's what this debate is actually about tonight. Retribution is a term that has become unfairly kind of synonymous with revenge. But in its simplest form, retribution means to give what is due as either a reward or a punishment. It's an eye for an eye, proportional approach to criminal justice. Retribution recognizes that every person, even those who commit crimes, if you're a person of faith, you'd say the person is created in the image of God. If you're a person that believes in fairness and equity, you'd say that that person is of equal value and potential to everybody else, even if they've committed a crime. If they do something wrong, though, we need to respond. Their choices matter, and we want them to experience the consequences of the choices. When our goal is retribution, we seek to punish wrongdoing in a way that is proportional to the crime that they committed and does not diminish that person's value as a human being. A proportional response also signifies that human value of the victim, the person that was harmed by the crime. So in other words, if our justice system does not have a goal of retribution, we in effect say that the perpetrator is not worth the punishment, or that the victim is not worth the effort. So if we don't have retribution, what I'm saying is we devalue the life of two people. The person that committed the crime, who's not worth, it's a nuisance, they're not worth our effort, or the person that's been victimized and saying they're not worth our effort to hold that other person accountable and right the wrongs. Retribution says that a person must be punished for their crime, but not punished more than they deserve. I want you to note what I just said. Retribution, as a value and a principle, says that a person must be punished for their crime, but not punished more than they deserve. However, when we try to take a retributive approach, we run into a complex question of what punishment fits the crime. As I just said, not punished more. If someone has repeatedly committed a crime, but a juvenile commits the same offense for the first time, should they get the same punishment? Is that just? These mitigating factors, like the ones I just described, can be part of what we talk about when we discuss retributive justice. Now, I'm going to skip deterrence, and I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to talk about rehabilitation, because that's what we're here to compare and contrast as these two. Rehabilitation comes in varying degrees and approaches, but this goal starts with the premise that people can change. Rather than just throwing someone in prison for their crime, we want to try to change them, hoping that they will not only keep them from committing crimes in the future, but also will improve their quality of life. Sometimes social ills like extreme poverty or untreated mental illness lead to criminal behavior. Crime can be the symptom of other underlying problems. Rehabilitation focuses on trying to resolve those underlying issues as well as addressing common criminal thinking patterns. For example, if a person is an alcoholic, as I am, and gets arrested for drunk driving, as I did, we could just find them and make them serve time in jail. But often, a person convicted of drunk driving will also be sentenced, if you will. But it won't be to jail, it will be to go to a rehabilitation institution or Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in order to address the underlying addiction. By connecting punishment to the forms of accountability that are more effective at rehabilitating, the person may be able to get sober and stay that way, so they won't have to drink and drive in the future. Now, that's the approach of rehabilitation. It's very difficult because it's hard to measure. How much better do you have to behave to be considered rehabilitated? Justice is not necessarily satisfied when a person is quote-unquote cured of their bad behavior. We must always limit any rehabilitative efforts with the retributive or the proportional punishment for the crime. C.S. Lewis, an author of the 20th century, argued against rehabilitation as the primary goal, because although it seems mild and merciful, if it is the only method used, it actually keeps someone from paying for their wrongdoings and does not hold them accountable. So in other words, the mechanics of rehabilitation would be if I drove my car and hit somebody else's car, and my punishment was to go and learn how to become sober, and that was my only punishment. That did nothing to actually make amends or pay back the damage that I did. Now, the society might have benefited. I did have some accountability. I got sober. I will not drink and drive again. But at the same time, I didn't pay back the damage I did. And with retribution, the other side of what we're talking about here today, I may be told that all I have to do is pay back the damage to the car, because that is in fact what I did that day. But if I'm an alcoholic, I am at risk of damaging a new car every single day that I go out after I've been drinking. And so the society is at risk if there's no action taken to work on the underlying issue. So I hope you understand the mechanics of the way I'm proposing this to you, because in America, we've seen approaches that have been almost entirely focused in one of these primary goals or the other, in rehabilitation or in retribution. And I would argue today that both come up short. Now, I understand that your debate would be which one is more important, and I think that that's a worthy debate. But I think that for you to understand the mechanics of a complete justice system, and with me sharing with you today, I want to be able to talk to you about a couple of other principles before we open this up for questions, because I'm sure that you've heard of deterrence. Deterrence means that you're not going to break the law, because we've made an example of other people that have done the same activity. In a sense, all laws and their associated punishments are intended to act as a deterrent. If we didn't put people on notice of what was a crime and demonstrate that people who commit those crimes will face the penalty, more people would presumably commit crimes. There would be no moral obligation not to, and no formal consequences. However, not all laws are effective deterrents. Deterrence is based on a very large and often faulty assumption that illegal behavior is a logical process. It assumes that before someone commits a crime, they'll thoughtfully consider the consequences before doing so. So if I do X, then I will suffer Y. In our experience, however, and in my own personal experience, criminal activity is rarely an exercise in logical deduction. In fact, when asked why a person commits a crime, they're often at a loss to explain why, other than it seemed like a good idea. They needed money, so they committed a robbery. They were angry, so they assaulted somebody. They were addicted, so they bought or sold drugs. Or in the case of gang violence, they were sometimes simply following orders. They rarely weigh the consequences before acting impulsively. If people applied logic to crime, there would be a lot less crime. That's something I'd like you to note today. So in order for the criminal law to successfully deter, a lot hinges on implementation. Some shining examples of deterrence come from what's been coined swift and sure sanctions, but those are really penalties within the criminal justice system. So you do a bigger crime, and we're seeking to have a behavioral change. And so with each failure of going through the system, you receive a swift and sure sanction that's proportionate to what you did. If you don't show up to a meeting on time, if you don't call your probation officer, you get a swift and sure small proportionate sanction, which in effect helps you change your behavior on a daily basis. And that's where deterrent deterrence is brought in with almost used as a rehabilitative and a retributive package all in one. And the last point that I want to make toward that point of what I just said is where Prison Fellowship discusses the ideas of retribution in its entirety being the primary and really the default and lead system in a country, like in the war on drugs, where we said that we were going to take retribution against people that possessed illegal drugs, that sold illegal drugs, conspired to sell, manufacture, ship, and all sorts of things, and that retribution with stiffer and stiffer penalties that the politicians would, and the sheriffs and everybody up to the President of the United States would say were proportionate penalties for the damage these individuals were causing. The idea was that retribution would do two things. One, that it would bring about justice for the people's wronged by that person's crime, that they would receive justice. And that second, the deterrence that I just spoke of. Others would stay off of drugs, or they certainly would not want to buy or sell drugs. And what we've seen is that retributive, focus-centered experiment in America has fallen short, as we know and as we watch the 6 o'clock news. We have tried a rehabilitative approach in America. This goes back some time and is probably beyond the studies of where you are in your classes today. But I want you to know that America has had some very detailed experiments in rehabilitation only. And the problem with rehabilitation only is that where there is no willingness, there will be no change in behavior, there will be no accountability or amends made, and therefore no justice for the person with the crime, the underlying crime, as well as no change in the future behavior. So what we argue is that actually both of these systems, left on their own, fall short. And Prison Fellowship believes that there's a better way that combines the elements of rehabilitation, deterrence, and retribution. But it goes further because it looks at the big picture. It addresses the needs of the rights of the victim and the community, acknowledging that crime impacts everybody. Justice that restores doesn't just mean making somebody do the time if they do the crime. It means holding men and women accountable to accept responsibility for the harm they have caused to the victims and communities, and to take the steps to make amends and rebuild trust with their communities. Healthy individuals that have grown and repented will seek to make amends either voluntarily or when the aggrieved party seeks restoration for an injustice. The types of amends and consideration that can right a wrong for an injustice are as infinite as the forms of the injustice itself. However, our government, formed by and for the community, simply cannot demand voluntary exchanges of amends, repairs, and restorative efforts between the harmed parties and those who have done the damage. We can and should suggest restorative opportunities within our options for punishment, but our laws, rules, and sentencing guidelines must also provide for other punitive consequences for those who do not avail themselves to these opportunities. So if you heard what I just said, I said a carrot and a stick. You've probably received that from your parents before. You know, do you want to do this, or do you want to face this penalty? I have a joke, and I tell people that willingness comes from pain. So if you want the willingness for a person to be reformed, you must hold them accountable, and they must voluntarily choose the other path of rehabilitation and behavioral change. Because if they're not a willing participant, you get nothing. Prosecutors, judges, police, and policymakers are increasingly becoming aware that while incarceration is a necessary option and provides a powerful motivation for compliance, it is often less effective in restoring the victim and the community than an alternative sentence. Alternatives might allow for voluntary measures of contrition and direct amends to be offered to the person who's violated, from the person who's violated law. Incarceration is an extraction of a person's life and liberty. It's a serious punishment, but remember, it's passive. For example, if someone breaks into a car to steal my laptop and is punished by sitting in jail for 30 days, this does nothing to pay back for the harm and loss to me. They stole my laptop. In fact, it significantly costs me and the community more in taxpayers. It requires the person comply, sit in that jail cell for 30 days, but not any genuine effort to restore me. This is why our leaders are learning that having other forms of accountability that offer more opportunity for active, not passive, but active participation in restoring the victim in the community can advance justice and reduce future crime. Instead of, in this case, being sent to jail for 30 days, the person who stole my laptop must pay restitution to me, complete community service, and be monitored in the community, demonstrating their initiative. And their efforts can lead to a more, what it leads to is change in a more transformative effort. So this is why we advance these, the alternative, if you will, to strictly retribution or rehabilitation. I wanted to offer to you those mechanics. And in summary, I would say that, you know, I will open it up to questions, but remember that I talked about rehabilitation, retribution. I added in the concepts of deterrence and restorative justice. Restorative justice is a combination of those three, and it affects three parties: the person who committed the crime, the person who's, you know, been victimized, so the victim, and the community. And those are the parties to the justice system. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. I think I might be supposed to be asking these questions and answering them myself. So bear with me as I'm learning. I have a question from Victoria Long. Can rehabilitation be used as retribution? Can rehabilitation be a punishment? It can be, and it has been tried to do that before. And in fact, I think that it may very well be used in that form in America by judges who have not learned that that does not yield a very good result. So if you say to somebody, you can go to jail, or you can go to a addiction rehab clinic, you're essentially giving them retribution for either. And they're just picking which one sounds better, which one might have better beds. They're not really, again, that willingness is not evident. So I really don't think you can effectively use rehabilitation as retribution. I think it really just, it becomes one or the other. Chad Williams asks, doesn't a person have to want to change in order for rehab to be successful? Chad, I spoke about that in my comments, and I'll tell you, I very much wanted to change. I have a wife and three beautiful daughters, and I was the Speaker of the House in Michigan at age 34. I graduated college when I was 20 years old. I had a lot to live for and a lot to put down the bottle and drinking from. But I still got arrested after those accomplishments that I just said. So I want to let you and everybody know on the phone that willingness, that seed of willingness, is the big question. If there is not a willingness, then you can't pursue the alternative methods. And that's why we say that restorative approaches work better than a rehabilitative approach altogether, because it allows for the person to opt in on their own to an active participation in making amends and paying back the damage that they did, not simply attending a class in a rehab and laying in bed there or laying in bed in a jail, but actually actively paying back the damage that they've done. So thank you for asking that. What work is the C.S. Lewis quote from? I will get back to you on that. That comes from Chris Holdman. Actually, while I have this up, I was gonna read that to you, but I didn't want to read everything. So Okay. The C.S. Lewis quote is from the Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, the 20th century. It was written in 1949. C.S. Lewis, the Humanitarian Theory of Punishment. Andrea, similar to Victoria, do you think rehabilitation can work hand in hand? Can rehabilitation be used effectively with retribution? I certainly believe that it can, and just so I'm maybe I talk too fast or I use different words, but I hope that by the time I got done explaining what I meant, that you understood that when you start combining these together, that's the ingredients for restorative justice, and that's what I was trying to describe. Erin asked me, I'm not sure if it's too soon, hold on, she's talking about rehabilitation helps employ ex-criminals, people that have committed crimes, paid back their debt. Will that be hard to argue for somebody in this group? I don't think it should be, because I think that you can start by looking at the last two presidents of the United States. George W. Bush, when he got done, he was the president of the United States. I understand you're a younger crowd now, but he was saw America through 9/11 and the beginning of two wars. And he titled his book Decision Points. And the first sentence in the first paragraph of the first chapter was not about 9/11. It was not about the wars or the other the financial meltdown in 2008. It was about how he learned to get sober and to change as a person. So he got a pretty good job. He ended up being president of the United States. We could go through a whole bunch of other people in popular culture. Some of you probably like Robert Downey Jr. Of the Avengers, Iron Man, did 3.5 years in prison. There's cases all around us, but in each case, the person has undergone a behavioral change. They haven't simply repaid their debt through a retributive process. So to answer your question, Aaron, I actually think it's a very important thing to say that the person that goes through a rehabilitative process, it does actually help them with employment, I think much more so than just simply a retributive sentence being paid. Theodore Flunker, should we avoid bringing up too many U.S. examples since most from the outside look at the U.S. and think our criminal justice system is terribly flawed? I think that it just gives you more examples for what you're trying to make of cases if you're developing your arguments based in the U.S. Examples. I think that in other countries like New Zealand and in the UK, you'd be able to find some more developed models of a restorative system where victims and the people that caused the crime in the community work together. Really, not the government. The government secondary plays a mediator role, and they work together. It's harder to find examples of restorative justice in America, but you absolutely can find examples of a strictly retributive approach and really a rehabilitative approach. So I hope that answers your question, Theodore Flunker. What is the biggest factor, Joshua Beckman, in having such a massive prison population? Would it be an over-focus on rehabilitation or retribution or something else? For me, it's actually something else. The idea that you're a nation of laws, which kind of answers the guest question below. not a justice system. The justice system serves, the nation of laws that's executed by our executive branch. And so what you end up getting in America is really what you write the law and you create a structure, and then in that structure you have incentives, whether they're properly incented or improperly incented, and then as you mete out the justice, whether or not you get things. And so our forefathers in America, this is one of the most fascinating forethoughts that they had in the Constitution. They really understood and knew that if a government had the power to take away your stuff, your property, if you've ever heard of civil asset forfeiture in America, it exists now. It's being fought against by parties from the right and the left to look at our information without a warrant in the amendments. And from reading the newspaper, that is being done and on your cell phones and your emails every day. And that you needed to have a competent lawyer, which most of our economically disadvantaged areas don't have. And then you have the government incenting the police force and the judicial system to be paid based on the number of convictions that they process. Well, it only makes sense that they would say the people that are being convicted are really, they don't have lawyers or what would be a competitive legal defense, as our founders initiated. And in often cases, their assets are seized without things and without a trial and warrants, and information was gained in a way that wasn't envisioned. So I really think that what is going on and what's driving the criminal justice system in America is a tolerance for moving away from the core values from which our country was founded, and what you're seeing is the net result being lived out in the system today. I got to keep moving with these, so I can't probably answer all of them. Craig, Aaron, thank you for this. You say your information is really interesting and unbiased. I'm curious what side you're on. I can't tell you that, Aaron. I'm on the side of restorative justice. I'm a little background on myself. I'm a conservative Republican. People have called me right of Attila the Hun, called me right-wing extremist. But at the same time, President Obama asked me to give the closing prayer at the Easter White House breakfast this year to talk about redemption and the possibility that people could repay their debts and move forward in their life. So I don't think I'm unbiased, but I do think that the work that we do at Prison Fellowship and that I do, we try to keep it limited to our values and to the truth as we understand it. And that keeps it clearer than trying to make it fit with a politician or a law that they propose. Is it worth valuing rehabilitation even though some won't be rehabilitated no matter what? Now this is going to appeal to a different side of me. I've given you one side, I gave you more of the political analysis there. This is where my heart is. And I don't believe there's any throwaway people. I just don't. I believe that when people are conceived, that I would care for that person, whatever circumstance that they were born into, that you wouldn't throw somebody away because their mom isn't married or doesn't have a job or is addicted to crack cocaine or whatever is going on. That we shouldn't have that kind of power over each other. And the same would be true of somebody that's going through the system. I think that people should be given a proportionate crime for what they've just done. And when you should take into context their history, right? So if they're escalating in their violence or their drug use or other things, and they're not repenting, then you escalate the proportion of the retributive parts of their sentence. But for that person, I just know too many people that are really great Americans that contribute so much right now that have gone to alcoholic rehab more than 20 times. And now they're great fathers, great business owners, great employers, and members of the community. And so I wouldn't want to sell anybody short. I think that's what makes our country special. is that we value life. What do I believe? Joshua, is the role of private rehabilitative organizations. I think that they play a role. The rehabilitative organizations play a role almost exclusively private in America. The prison system is probably almost or more than 90% publicly run. There are private prisons in America, but prisons are not considered rehabilitative organizations, and there is very little funding for any rehabilitation inside of prisons. And that is another question for structurally, why did we do this? If you're going to pay for someone's food, shelter, air conditioning, heat, television, and everything else, why wouldn't you be teaching them to live a different way while they're there? In America, we've chosen not to do that. Other countries say, well, we have you for the next, whatever it is, 5, 8 years for whatever you just did. Why don't we see to it that you'll never do it again? In America, we don't have a rehabilitative going on in prison. Prison fellowship, where I work, is actually in 85% of the prisons. We bring in rehabilitative programs into prisons, but we don't accept a dime from the government. We do that with private donations, and we bring that in. Governments are learning the importance of rehabilitative programs in prisons, though, and it is finally starting to grow. Does drug rehabilitation in the CJ, criminal justice system, actually work, and does criminal justice system do more drug rehabilitation in-house or out-of-house? Drug rehabilitation takes place inside of the criminal justice system at an immense level in the drug and alcohol in the lowest level courts. That is the highest number of arrests that we see is at the local level for drug and alcohol violations. And so yes, that is referred out through, and there are successes, or you wouldn't see the direction we've gone in America. When I was a kid, drunk driving wasn't something that was punished severely. Then it was punished too severely, where you put people in jail for a year. And what they learned was if somebody went to jail for a year, they lost their family, their job, their ability to earn an income. And so they would go back to drinking the day that they got out, and they would become more of a danger to the public than wearing an ankle tether and blowing into a machine and taking blood tests every day and demonstrating that you've actually changed your behavior while you keep a job, while you try to stay plugged in with your family, while you try to keep your house, and you pay back the damage you did. The person now is paying back what they did, and they're learning how to stay sober in the real world, not laying on a cot and saying, well, I was sober for a year because I was in a jail cell. That doesn't teach you how to stay sober. You have to learn in the real world. So yes, there are examples of the criminal justice system teaching people and it actually working. Marquita says, but how can one see that rehabilitation has worked and been completed if someone has changed? People, for example, fooled authorities and was freed only to go on to murder again. Well, that is absolutely true, and there is no way in the criminal justice system for us to guarantee the rehabilitation of a person. And that's why at Prison Fellowship we say that you have to include the retributive aspects, and that's why we say the restorative justice to that victim, to that amends to the community as part of it, rather than just a certificate of rehabilitation that, hey, great, I've changed. Well, it takes a lot of work to make amends for the damage that you've done, not passively sitting in a cell, but actively paying it back. And through that process, it's just harder for people to have it both ways. They either are going in the criminal way in a disingenuous way, or they're willing, they've turned a corner and they're willing to make amends and live their life a different way. And that's noticed by people, but it will never be perfect. But I can tell you that how you measure these things, and like I just gave you the example of a drug court, there will be people that are in a drug court that they do not send people to jail anymore in the drug court, usually right out of the box. They work with them to stay sober in the community, wearing a tether, doing daily testing as I described. And people that go through that and successfully complete it will still get in a drunk driving accident and hurt people in America. But the point is, far fewer of the people that go through the drug court end up drinking and driving again than the people that went to jail for a year. I'm going to say that again. Far fewer drunk drivers come out of having done the drug court on the outside and having to learn to stay sober in the real life than those that were told to learn how to stay sober in jail for a year. And so the public understands that when that one person unfortunately goes back to drinking and drives and hurts somebody, that they're not going to get rid of the system now, because if they got rid of it, they might have 12 or 13 people driving and hurting people that day. I hope that makes sense to you, what I just said. Would you consider restorative justice to be more rehabilitative, retributive, or neither? The answer to me is neither when it comes to more. I think that it balances. Last year's LD resolution was on national security and personal privacy. Is there anything that carried it over with retribution and our own security from repeat offenders? I'm not sure, Zach, what that question is. I would like to answer that for you, but it would be carried over with retribution. Not sure. But Marquita, but how can one see that rehabilitation is work? Oh wait, I'm sorry. Heather Driesman asks, can a psychopath or mentally ill person be rehabilitated? For me, it's a recognition of the truth. If somebody can understand what truth is, for me, I've been able to see a miraculous change in all sorts of people. I try to make the comment to my friends and others that talk about things like a psychopath or a mentally ill person, which obviously does exist in our country and every other country. But in America, what's really going on is people that are being diagnosed with mental health issues. And I can tell you that anybody that is put in a cage has a mental health issue. If you have to live in a cage full of fear, surrounded by other people. And we're saying that there's a bunch of people that are mentally ill in prisons. I think we mistake sometimes the numbers. What we're saying is we have mental health issues. We have people in prison that have been raped, abused, and victimized themselves. So they have mental health issues. And they're choosing crime because they're not processing and finding a healthy solution to their own pain. So we have mental health issues, but they may not be mentally ill. Dealing with mentally ill people and psychopaths in America is something that is done in an entirely different way than the mental health system. The people that are used still in institutions, or people like the shooter that shot President Reagan, who was incarcerated, and not in a prison ever, but in a psychiatric ward for I believe 30-some years before he was released this year, because he was genuinely mentally ill, somebody who was determined not to have been able to recognize the reality of what he had just done. I've got to speed up here. Is our criminal justice system equipped to provide effective rehabilitation principles to offenders? And the answer is no. The government does not really have a basis for that. And I would argue that as they introduce the latest fact for drug overdoses, that what they're trying to say is a cure for your drug use is another drug. And I think the government will be very surprised when they learn that that did not cure what the person's problem was. It just prevented them from using that solution. That drug, you can't get high with that drug anymore. Doesn't mean that you aren't looking for something at the time. Understand that when you're rehabilitated, you're not looking anymore. You have a better solution than using a drug or alcohol or committing a crime. Retribution cannot be sought outside of the criminal justice system, as that would be vigilante. Can rehabilitation be performed outside of the criminal justice system? It absolutely is, all day, every day. Rehabilitation is performed all day, every day outside of the criminal justice system, but I want you to know that retribution is also sought in the civil justice system and all sorts of other aspects of our life as well. So the values of rehabilitation, the values of retribution, and formalized processes through our government are available in both inside and outside of the justice system. What does rehabilitation for violent crimes look like? Again, as somebody who works inside of a lot of prisons, I would tell you, to the person that is committing the crime, we think that violent crime is a problem in America. We call it a problem. I want you to know that to a person that commits the violent crime, it's not their problem, it is their solution. Okay, it's their solution. So somebody's solution might be to get drunk or high. Somebody else's solution might be to steal or do something nonviolent. Somebody else's solution might be to do something violent, like an assault or even a murder. But understand that rehabilitation can apply to all folks, and that there really isn't too much of a mechanical difference between a nonviolent or a violent crime. It's something that is wrong with the decisions that the person made, that committed the crime. And you have to address both of those, whether you can argue it through your retributive processes or your rehabilitative. But I would argue that you're better off not segmenting crimes. That's just my opinion. How would restorative justice be applied to a case where emotional damage is being done to the victim instead of physical damage? Now, I'm assuming you meant a criminal case, Brian, so restorative justice would be done in a way that's respectful of that victim. So if the person was psychologically abusing, doing something that rose to, say, a criminal level, stalking or something like that, usually the restorative justice approaches that I've seen that are effective, what they do is they actually separate the groups. So let's say it was stalkers, and you had 30 stalkers over here that had stalked people that wanted to pay back their debt, and 30 people that have been stalked over here. What you do is you switch up the groups, because the person who stalked and has been stalked, they don't want to be in a room together. It's disrespectful to both of them to work it out. But a way of making amends for the people that have done it with other people is they can explain what their thought process was, what they're going through, how they're trying to change, and the victim can tell them how it scared them, how it made them feel, and all the rest of it, and they can both be validated through different processes like that. So restorative justice is not always one-to-one with the victim of the crime, because to forgive people, you don't have to reconcile. What is your views about Singapore's criminal justice system? They're very strict on retributive justice, and that is correct, but they also, I'll give you one aspect of what they do that America falls short on, is that they actually have closure, and they allow people to once they've repaid their debt, to go back into the community, and it's called the Yellow Ribbon Campaign there in Singapore. But I think that the answer is the deficiencies that I described in the retributive only system would be evident in the Singapore's criminal justice system. I'm not familiar with Saudi Arabia. Somebody asked me that. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get through all of these. I'm going to end with one that I didn't spend a lot of time talking about. Victoria Long says, how important would you say the victim is in the resolution? Should their needs be heavily taken into account? And I would say that absolutely, and that is one of the major flaws to I saw some questions about the American justice system and where the flaws are. It's that we've allowed the government to take the role of victim, right? So when I went into trial for my drunk driving, I had to pay back the state. It was me against the state, right? If I broke into a shop and stole, it would be the state prosecuting me, not a victim. And what we do is we allow the person to hold their rage, and we allow them to distance themselves from the damage they cause. Whereas if the victim was respected and they were brought in and the amends were part of it, rather than just paying the government, right, whatever the government fees are for whatever the government needs instead of the victim's needs, I think our system would be a great check and a balance against our government, and I believe it would bring the focus and the control and the scope of our system back down to where it probably should be. I think that the reason why it's exploded was the government has successfully made themselves the victim in America, not the person who was actually victimized, and therefore the government could then have the laws written where they could go out and prosecute a bunch of people because they were always the victim, instead of focusing on where the victims are. And I'll leave you with one horrifying statistic if you want to know what that looks like. You can look it up. Look up the closing rate for homicide in Chicago or Detroit. In 2012, Chicago's close rate was 30%. In Detroit, it was 50%. So while the government says that they're in the business of protecting victims, 50% of the murderers in Detroit didn't even get arrested. 70% of the murderers in Chicago in 2012 didn't even get arrested. So the arrests are on nonviolent crimes where there is not a victim asking for an arrest, and the resources are going increasingly there instead of where a family has been devastated by the loss of a loved one who's been murdered. So that's what happens when you take a victim out of the equation. And with that, I'm done. My time is up, but I thank you.
Thank you. Let's join everyone in thanking Mr. DeRoche in the comments. I'll be able to send him those. So now we have concluded the webinar. Thank you so much for everyone who participated. You all did a great job between sending each other links and submitting questions. We will have a recording that I will send out to everyone in case you'd like to share it. And I'm going to go on to a slide that has a quick survey we'll ask you to take. Should only take a couple of minutes. Thank you so much, Mr. DeRoche, for joining us. And thanks to all the students who joined us on this webinar. Good night.